behalf of the whole team at Impact Central, we are so excited to have Steve Cockram with us tonight, as he was talking about just a little bit earlier, to talk about dealing with uncertainty in these really difficult times of COVID. For those of you that aren't familiar with Steve, he's an international speaker. He's an author, a consultant to top-level executives and leaders around the world. He's also, in particular, a subject matter expert on personality, organizational leadership, emotional intelligence, interpersonal communications, and of course, all of those things so important in the organizations of today in terms of how we interact so much, even more so as we deal with conversations on Zoom. I'm really happy to say that Steve is a great friend of Impact Central and also a friend of mine. And he shares our views on the importance of impact. And we're so pleased that he's accepted to be one of our first members of our founding faculty for Impact Central. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Importantly, Steve's also an entrepreneur. He's the founder or co-founder of GiANT, which is one of the fastest growing digital startups that now delivers leadership skills to some of the largest firms globally. And so when we open it up to Q&A a little bit later, you're going to be asking your questions also to someone who has been on the front line of being a startup and so understands that. And I think to start it off, Steve, would be great to ask you, I think maybe some people are wondering, why, at Impact Central, we say we're all about the impact entrepreneur. Why is it so important for entrepreneurs to even think about leadership when sometimes we have this image of, the entrepreneur is one or two people toiling in a garage, and they're kind of thinking, well, when I got my product perfect, when I have 15 or 20 employees, yeah, then I'll start thinking about leadership. Why is leadership so important for entrepreneurs and startups?
Yeah, firstly, Gordon, thank you for my American introduction. As a Brit, I always get very embarrassed when people say those things, but we have to have that kind of resume to keep the Americans happy. So forgive me, the rest of you. Why is leadership so important? Well, I would say that leaders define culture. And if you are the founder, doesn't matter whether you have one person, two people or more, you are still primarily defining the culture of what the future will be. And actually the intentional process of how you do that is hugely important. And one of the great myths that people think that leadership is purely through line management. Ultimately, when you're leading culture, you're engaging with multiple stakeholders at the same time. So as every entrepreneur will tell you, that you will have multiple stakeholders. You might have investors, you'll certainly hopefully have clients, you'll have suppliers, you'll have contractors, you'll have people that you'd like to work with and agencies. So really, whether you realize it or not, you are always leading culture and you are always managing relationships. And for me, that understanding of how you lead yourself, how you lead others, but critically how you influence the culture and those around you, means that leadership is not something that is an issue when you've got 30 people. Leadership is an issue on day one, because as the leader, you are defining the culture for good or ill. So one of the reasons why self-awareness is so important is because we are all defining culture, whether we realize it or not. The fact that you might think you're not doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't, in my experience.
So thank you. I mean, clearly so many different ways that we can influence our organizations and build them. So if we're going to focus on leadership and we want to develop those skills, how do we develop leadership skills?
Yeah, gosh. I think that I would say that the primary task of leadership is to basically keep everything on target. So if you think the crosshairs of a target are your vision and your values, and really most entrepreneurs are usually heavily vision focused. We're usually go-getters. We want to make things happen. So we usually know what achievement looks like. I think that the other piece is really defining the values. They're often more important, interestingly, because your strategies and vision may even change as you pivot. But if you can embed the values of how you want to choose to be as a group of people, as an organization, what is it are going to be the hallmarks of basically what your culture feels like and how it treats people? That for me, Gordon, is that holding the crosshairs intention. So for me, I am a highly driven, a very task-focused visionary. I've had to really learn not how to hold the vision central, but how do I make sure that the values are also at the center of what it is we're doing, because apparently half the people are human beings before they're human doings, whereas I tend to have been a human doing who's had to learn how to be a human being over time.
So I think that's really important in thinking about the leadership culture and the values that we want to put forward. I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about how we go about or how people perceive us, and we've had conversations about that, Steve, and I always have found that really interesting, because I think we're often so focused on um, you know what we are projecting, and we don't think about what we look like to somebody else as a leader. So from a leadership perspective, maybe you can talk a little bit about, what are the characteristics that people see in us and in the leaders that they want to follow?
So I think self-awareness is, people always ask, well, what's the most important skill set of leadership? Where would you start? And I used to say to people is you have to know yourself to lead yourself first, because most people that I meet, including myself, are unconsciously incompetent. We really have no idea what it's like to be on the other side of us. I mean, if GiANT is doing well around the world, it's usually because all we've done is taken all the mistakes that Jeremy and I made in our early life and career and have created a way that other entrepreneurs can learn from them before they have to get it wrong. But so I look back almost embarrassed at, what it was really like to be on the other side of me, and also that ability to go, what is the impact that my leadership has on those around me? So that foundational piece of really being able to look in the mirror and go, do I know myself? Because you're never going to lead others until you can lead yourself. And so much leadership that we are almost embarrassed to look at times is not people who are deliberately being annoying or deliberately being selfish or deliberately being cruel. They're simply leaders that are doing for others what they would most want done for themselves. And I think that's why a lot of the work on self-awareness and personality and just being able to give teams, however small, vocabulary and language, which means I get to celebrate your superpower. And as the leader, what I'm able to do is create an environment where everyone gets to bring their best. Probably if you cut me in half and say, what do I believe is the most important attribute of leadership, particularly in the digital world, is, I would say, Gordon, it's the ability to build agile collaborative teams. One of the big transitions from industrial to digital is that the primary unit of success is not the talented individual in the way it was. The world is too complicated, and the ability to lead team, some of which you will employ, some of which will be, contractors, some of it technology partners, whatever it is you do, but the ability to be able to effectively gather people and to deploy their skills and expertise that are different to your own. That's where most leaders get it wrong. They apply what I call I guess the golden rule is do for others what you'd want done for you. But
Right.
sadly, if you do that for the people you lead, you'll get it wrong at least 80% of the time. The platinum rule is do for others what they would most want done for them. And I think that's the reason why for most entrepreneurs who are very myopic and everywhere I go, I'm selling what I'm selling, the ability to have that emotional intelligence and the ability to understand how to connect with people who are different to you is really, I would say, one of the most foundational components of any successful entrepreneurial venture.
I know part of the topic that we wanted to that we put in our title today that we wanted to talk to people about is uncertainty and the difficult challenges that we're facing. I think, being an entrepreneur, it's always uncertain. There's always a lot of challenges, but in particular, as you've been working with teams, perhaps some teams that, were coming together before the crisis and now are having to work differently. What are some of the things that people need to think even more about in terms of making teams function well in an environment where, you may not meet physically for months at a time? This is a visual kind of Zoom call is as close as you're going to get. How do you kind of make teams continue to work well in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically the digital world makes as added complexity. So if you weren't a great team leader before lockdown, it's very unlikely you've been more successful as we move to digital, because in some ways, the skill sets of leadership have to be honed and refined more. It's more difficult to lead remotely because you don't actually pick up on all of the nuance of communication and body language. It's better than a phone call, certainly better than email. But I think that the reason why we've always said you have to have vocabulary and language and tools that create the context in which teams can actually track their ability to perform. I mean, we've spent quite a lot of time trying to work out, Google did a lot of research for us, which we're incredibly grateful for, and they're actually a client of ours now, where we define the 5 key hallmarks of the very highest performing teams, which were communication is foundational. Can every person in the team really bring their best contribution to every discussion, and actually are they truly heard, valued and appreciated? So relationships are, is there real trust and what Google called psychological safety inside the team? Can people disagree with the leader of the team and not fear for their future or their career prospects? So psychological safety, communication, relationship, alignment. You'd be amazed, the people who are really good relationally are often not the most gifted at alignment. How do we make sure that actually we all know where we're going, and how do we all know where we're going to get there? And then execution. How do you execute well? How do you actually say, this is where we're going, this is how we measure it? And then the last one was capacity. How do you keep creating the capacity for growth while you continue to grow what you do? Because the more successful you are as an entrepreneur, however gifted your initial team is, eventually they will burn out if you don't learn to multiply the capacity to do what you do. So we call those really the metrics of an invincible team. And here's the problem: no individual is naturally good at all those things. So I'm really good at communication and relationships, and I'm really good at capacity and multiplication. But alignment and execution is always a learned behavior for me. So GiANT went to another level when we were able to bring in people for whom that was their superpower. So the team, even if you are a small team, learning how to harness all the gifts that are in there and really creating vocabulary and language to enable you to do that, Gordon, is, for me, it doesn't matter how good your idea is. In the end, if you can't build team and if you can't influence those that you are seeking to maybe invest in your product or buy your product or deliver your product or whatever it might be, understanding how you connect to other human beings and make them feel that you understand and connect with them. Influence is so important, and influence is driven more, I believe, in the new world by emotional intelligence than it is by classic IQ. So that's a bit of a disappointment for those of you with big brains, but fundamentally relationships have become the primary currency of wealth and influence in the new world.
I mentioned in the introduction, the Americanized introduction, that you're an author. I've read the 3 books you've written. You've co-authored with Jeremy, which are the 5 Gears, 5 Voices. I actually reached into my bookshelf and pulled out my copy of 100X Leader. And I guess I've read, obviously your books and some other leadership books. I guess in terms of maybe you can talk a little bit also about how GiANT's evolved and some of what you're doing now, because I guess the question is, how do we turn books and things that we learn out of that into the practices that you've been talking about in the frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges for authors are that books are no longer things that people read. Books are really marketing, and they're effectively a credential. So, the fact that a New York publisher will publish our books is more about really our brand and authenticity. I think that what we've realized is, if I share my screen for a moment, then hopefully you can see what I mean. Because the new world, I mean, GiANT, if you really ask the question, really came out of a recognition 7 years ago now, which is terrifying when we started this business, that we believed that we were watching a transition in the issues and challenges the leaders we were working with were dealing with. We interviewed a lot of people and we said, what are the biggest challenges you're facing? Really assuming that whenever there is a technological breakthrough, which we're in the middle of right now, there is always work changes. And when work changes, the challenges of leadership change. So our bet, which proved to be a very good one, by the way, was that actually the world was changing. If the world of work was going to change through the digital revolution, then actually the skills of leadership would change. So here were the five. We condensed them down. I'll make them a bit bigger so you can see them. Here were the five. This was 7 years ago, by the way. These were the things that leaders told us were the biggest issues they're dealing with in the new world. How do I live a healthy work-life balance in a world that no longer switches off? I work 365 days a year, 27, because I have one of these things. And burnout and mental emotional health and sustainability of team was huge. So 5 Gears really, Gordon, was written to try and create a way of dealing with that. Influence is now more powerful than positional power alone. So you had a lot of people saying, how do I lead these millennials who, you know, want flat structures, they want this, that, and the other. They don't just do what I tell them to do. How can I possibly move from being a command and control leader to someone who's able to exercise influence? I need new skills. The third one was, we now live in a world that's visual and interactive with immediate application. And I think that was one of the biggest things you'll see with the toolkit here and what we give to the people who we work with. The old world was book-based, oral, and memorization of data. The new world is not like that. If what you're sharing with people, they can't use immediately, it will be gone. And so therefore leaders are having to learn how to communicate and connect with a world which really is very, very different, certainly to the one that I grew up in. Agile team is now more valuable than the individual. I've talked about that. And the number 5, which almost seems prophetic now, everyone's going dope, but 7 years ago, it seemed to be mostly the big corporates around the world that were saying, guys, how do I lead in a world that's digitally connected but geographically dispersed? Well, I guess all of us have had to do that. So really what we did well, Gordon, was we worked out what the challenges were and we built visual tools, because if children can't understand them and use them, so I talked a bit about before, know yourself to lead yourself. This is just self-awareness. But what we didn't do was we tried to deliver the system using a industrial age consulting coaching. It was really only 2 years ago. We built a platform so that we can have high tech and high touch in the process. So these are just visual tools which effectively capture profound principles of leadership, but in a way that the new world learns things. So here's a little one that we can do and everyone can play. Stop you going to sleep. The best leaders in the world have learned how to calibrate what we call high support and high challenge. They create what we call a liberating culture, that people are empowered to be the best they can possibly be, and they get opportunities to be stretched and grow. So that's the goal. That's green. That's healthy. The dollar and the pound are all green. That's the type of leadership we're looking for. But here's the problem. None of us are naturally good at both. So I am by nature very, very challenging. I want everyone to make a breakthrough. I like to win. I'm highly competitive. I've had to learn how to bring support, because if I'm just left to my own devices looking back, I'm in this bottom right quadrant. I'm like, we need to get this done. If you can't do it, I'm going to find somebody who will. And then when I'm being nice to you, people go, what do you want? Jeremy, my business partner, is so relational, unbelievably compassionate, caring, empathetic, will do everything he can to make everyone feel great. He struggles to bring challenge because he fears that people will be upset, or, you know, he wants people to love him. So he has a protecting tendency. And the problem with that is you often create entitlement. Everyone gets used to being protected, and ultimately mistrust, because every one of you out there who's high on support, low on challenge, usually has an advanced degree in hinting. So rather than bring direct challenge, you hint at your displeasure, and you keep hinting until you feel that people are flagrantly ignoring what you're saying to them. And then you blow like a kind of kettle, and then you go, I can't believe you've done that again. And then everyone's a little bit like, well, hang on, you're a bit like Jekyll and Hyde. You're being nice to me, rah, rah, high fives. But last time you were doing that, you were secretly really unhappy with what I was doing. So here's a little question we may come back to. This is the most self-awareness 101 as a leader. Which is your natural strength and which one is a learned behavior? So I said, for me, I've had to learn how to grow support, not diminish challenge, but I want to be up in this top right corner. And I don't want to be over here. That's abdication. And then we have circles of influence, which says the reason why we invest so much in the core of who you are as an individual is because it's like a stone dropping in a pond. If we create real transformational change at you in the self, it will impact the way you engage and lead your family, your friends, your team, your organization, community. And most leadership is accidental. The moment you become intentional and say, I'd love to be a liberator to the people that I live and lead every day, automatically asking that question will make it more effective.
Thank you, Steve. We've had this discussion on that particular graphic, and I still remember it really clearly. I know that a lot of the people on the webinar would love us to continue on so many of those other graphics, which are equally interesting, which are in the 100X Leader and other books that you've done. But what I'd like to do, there are some people on the webinar that I'm sure are interested in understanding what I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, which is that you and GiANT are going to be faculty for us at Impact Central. And I think it would be, I'm certainly excited to talk about this, but I'd like to just delve into a little bit more of what a startup that comes onto the accelerator program might experience in working together with you and the team of GiANT. So I know that we talked about one thing in the beginning. So almost at the very beginning of the accelerator, from some of your consultants, each of the founding teams will have an opportunity to engage with the GiANT consultant. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what that session will be like and what type of topics they would be getting into.
Yeah, no, I think that this is our way really at GiANT of going, not only do I love the team, I love what you guys are trying to do. It's our way of basically saying, we'll do this for the first cohort, definitely. But every team will have what we call a mini intensive. Mm-hmm. So one of our GiANT consultants will walk you through with the team, effectively our version of Myers-Briggs, really, with some of the tools and lots of Jedi mind tricks, which I tell you now and you won't necessarily believe it's true, but the team from Impact Central will tell you that it is amazing what happens when you begin to share the experience of self-awareness with each other, because everyone looks around at their teammates and thinks, oh, you must be pretty much like me, really, just maybe not quite so beautiful or as intelligent. But actually, when you realize we are far more different than you realize. So we will actually take you through a 2.5-hour process with you and anyone else who's in your team before you join the accelerator. And I will promise you that even if you've done it before, it will be eye-opening, because you'll be able to do it with the people or the person that you're going to be in this incredible experience with. So that's the bit at the beginning we're doing. And then what will happen is that GiANT will walk with you and your team through the 12-week process, and we'll do some one-to-one and also some kind of group coaching just to help you process what it is you're learning and to really work at how do we help you grow as a team. I'll be doing couple of the sessions through the program as well, which is reinforcing that. But it's just our way of saying, our belief is that you have a much better chance of being successful in everything that you're trying to do if part of what you're learning and part of what you're accelerating is that ability to kind of understand what it's like to be on the other side of you, understand hopefully the complementary superpowers that are in your team, and ultimately be able to create that synergy, which very few, in my experience, founding entrepreneurs do, which is it usually tends to be a mirror image. The culture is a mirror image of their strengths and their weakness. This will help you, or I know helps, create a context where actually 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 can be far more than what it would be without that. So there's an initial session, there's some ongoing coaching, and then obviously we're part of actually the delivery of the program as well. So that's the face-to-face part, and GiANT has a platform, which means that basically you'll have access to all of our resources, and you will also have the capacity to be able to take your invincible team score to benchmark your reality as a team when you come into our world. So communication, relational alignment, execution capacity, and you'll be able to track your progress over time. And even Google, a year into working with them, finally admitted what I told them was true at the beginning, but I couldn't prove, that any team where their overall score on what we call the invincibility metric goes up, it will track with every KPI you measure. They were really annoyed to have to admit it was true, having spent a lot more money than just my assumption that it had to be. But the idea being is, if your team component grows, it doesn't matter whether you're measuring widgets, growth, whatever it is, it will track that way. So hope that's helpful, Gordon, in terms of our commitment really to really help launch this well and give the best we have to the teams that will be part of that very exciting first cohort, really.
Thank you, Steve. We are absolutely thrilled to have you and the team working with us, and we know that they, both as individuals, but certainly as teams, they're going to get so much out of that learning and out of working together with their GiANT coaches and with you. It's kind of, I think about, you mentioned Google and large multinationals. A lot of us are familiar with these kind of traditional 360 review programs where you're supposedly, giving constructive criticism, but having experienced with GiANT some of the things that you've been talking about, it's kind of, it's orders of magnitude beyond that, because if you think about most organizations, sure, you hear what other people are thinking about you, but you just don't know how to communicate that, versus the approach that you take actually gets people opening up, functioning, and the enjoyment of working together as a team, obviously going through the difficult times, but then sharing those victories together is also so important. And I think that's something that, you really enable when you have a kind of GiANT enabled team.
I actually did it for the Impact Central team because I'm always a great believer that you should never be promoting something that you haven't experienced yourself as a leader. So we actually had a session all together with the amazing group of people that, so SL, Ben, Gordon, and who else is out there, Ian as well. And I think even for them as hard-bitten executives who've been around the block a few times, I think in the end you all agreed it was helpful, and hopefully it's been helpful as you guys have been building out all the things that you've been working on. So thank you for letting me road test it on you, so at least you could have authenticity in saying why you wanted it as part of the program.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it now over to SL to manage the Q&A. So we wanted to leave some time for people to ask questions of Steve or of questions of the Impact Central team, either about anything that's come up today and also about things that are coming in the future. So SL, do you want to?
Sure.
There's some things out there for people to respond to.
So it would be great if you have any questions, if you can just pop them into the chat. You're currently not probably able to speak, but if you can pop your questions into the chat, now is your opportunity to ask Steve and Gordon any questions that you might have with regards to what you have heard this evening. Okay, so one great one from Linda. Steve, are you able to give us a brief overview of the fifth parameter?
Sure. I'm presuming, Linda, you mean what I shared on the screen with my little toolkit here, which was this one here. So I think what I was trying to say was, to put it crudely, in the old days, if we worked in the same office as the people we led, I could take them for lunch on Friday and apologize for some of my behavior during the week. Whereas in the new world, we were finding that a lot of companies were, in many ways, they were not actually meeting the members of their team physically. They were maybe coming together for bid projects, or they were actually having to work across time zones using technology, which for most of us has now become second nature. I mean, I think, 10 days, the technology moved 10 years for a lot of people. So this idea of how do I lead people and how do I build teams when I'm not physically connected, and maybe we might get together once or twice a year or whatever it might be at an annual gathering. So GiANT has learned how to do this because we've been decentralized for the last 7 years. So, there's 2 of us in London, there's about 10 in the US, but they're all mostly in different places. So we've had to learn the rhythms of how do you do team. So things that, we spend a lot of time helping people think about what's the technology that's available. So I really wish I'd bought shares in all the company that are young millennials, all the technology. So Slack, Zoom, Miro, Trello, all of those we've been using for a long period of time. But actually, there is a way in which relationally, it's really increased the skill requirement, I believe, for leaders in a way which I don't think anybody realized how difficult it is when you don't have physical touch with people. There is a cognitive dissonance, they call it, where whenever you see somebody on a screen, there's a part of you, apparently, which my psychologists tell me, which means though we connect, we actually feel a longing to be with the person that we're actually seeing on screen, which is why I said in the beginning, we're getting worn out being on screens all day, because there's actually a part of how we're made as human beings that craves physical presence rather than just thinking I can see you on a screen, but wanting to be with you. So again, I said, for me, I've had to really be careful how I fill my day, because in the beginning, I just went back to back to back to back, thinking, great, I can be productive. I've had to ration the amount of time I spend on the screen because I just can't sustain that day in, day out. I have to have breaks. I never do back to back. So that was just my own learning through the COVID process. I hope that was helpful, Linda. If it wasn't, I apologize for rambling on.
Thank you very much. Linda had also just said she meant with regards the fifth parameter with regards to capacity. So if you have any little mini insights on that, and then
Please
I've got
feel free to interrupt me. SL, if I get the question wrong, then you can interrupt me at any point or flag something. So capacity, every entrepreneur I know who's successful eventually hits a capacity constraint, because there's only so much you can do yourself. And ironically, the more gifted you are, the worse the problem is. Because what people do is, I always say, is if you don't build capacity from day one as a mindset, by the time you think it's urgent, it's already too late. Because some things you can change quite quickly. Multiplying the capacity to do what you do is an intentional process I believe people have to think about long before there is the specific need there. Because what usually happens is entrepreneurs end up working every hour that God sends, and then they realize they can't do it all, and they try to point somebody else to do it. They bring them in at that point, and they assume that they will be able to just deliver the same thing. But of course, they don't represent the culture. They haven't grown up in the values. They don't share the same things. So you end up usually with a dilution of client experience and the dilution of brand, because in the end, if you don't actually, capacity is always important, but it's never urgent until it's too late, for those of you who understand that matrix. So I go, I'm always asking, if you're going to be successful, do you have a multiplication strategy? And are you working on it in advance of when you really need it? Because otherwise it will bite you and you end up having to go backwards before you can go forwards. Again, this is not me sharing wisdom out of the book. This is sharing what went wrong in various things that I've been part of in the past, where you go, this is awesome, we're crushing it, let's recruit some more people, and then find that the client experience is nowhere near, and you effectively hurt your brand, and then you have to apologize and give things away and work out that it's your fault, not theirs, which is usually I just blame everyone else until I realize it was my fault for not actually multiplying the culture first of all. But that's another tendency of my personality, that I'm usually assume someone else was wrong rather than me.
That's great. Thanks so much, Steve. Okay, so I've got one for you to think about, Steve, and then I want Gordon to answer the next one. So just give you a wee mini break. So Steve, if you can be thinking about, could you share tips on how to synthesize and describe a company culture? When we're looking to hire new people through this remote way, it's a bit of a struggle to articulate what it's like to work in the business.
Yeah.
And then one for Gordon for now. Can you talk a little bit into the structure and commitment of the Accelerator program?
Sure. So we're going to be providing a lot more information very shortly. Actually, next week we'll be opening up applications for the first cohort, which will start in the middle of September. The program is a 6-month program divided into 2 kind of 12-week modules. The first one, we really focus on kind of 3 elements: knowing yourself, knowing your business, and then knowing your customer or your audience. And then, so a lot about fine-tuning yourself, your startup, how everything works together with your team. And then the second half, we focus on really taking that, and you kind of lead the second half. We provide a lot of the resources, of course, but we support you in really driving it forward so that you're absolutely ready to to get investment and grow dramatically at the end of the program. The commitment is so, like with many things, of course, the amount of time you can put into it, of course, is always how much you get out of it. I think for people's planning, we'll be providing more detail on the exact days, but I think it generally is about kind of 2-ish days a week, but not necessarily 2 days in any week, but kind of that type of commitment on 2 days out of the week in putting information together, working with us online and our faculty, and together with your team, and driving that forward so that you can really encapsulate the information that we're providing you, that our faculty is providing you, embedding that, and then in the second half, a little bit more flexibility on your timing, but still similar types of commitment. And what we'll say a lot more detail next week, but ultimately our success is completely driven by your success, ability to get funding and grow. So we're with you all the way in supporting you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gordon. So Steve, just a wee reminder of what that question was. So we had a couple of questions on company culture and how you measure it, and how can you describe a company culture when everybody is working remotely currently? It's a bit of a struggle to articulate what that looks like. Do you have any hints or tips on that?
Yeah, you'd be surprised to know everything is. So I always say that basically culture leaders define culture. You can't outsource culture. The amount of HR departments which get, we come out low on our culture score and they blame HR. And I'm saying leaders define culture. But the key thing is you have to be very intentional. Most leaders are accidental. Therefore, they assume people will catch culture by osmosis. Now, when you're all in the same office, it's sometimes possible for that to happen. But what I would say to people is you have to be very intentional at identifying what are the hallmarks of culture that you want to multiply. So identify the principles or the values, that's codify them. So GiANT's toolkit is really our codified culture. So we're saying we want to create a liberating culture, and we made a visual, because if you can identify the component of culture that's important to you, codify it in some way, you can multiply it. And one of the things that still stuns me in the digital world is that companies still have induction and they do the same thing every time face to face. So for me, one of the things that I would do as the leader of any culture is I would capture it, I'd record it, I'd actually make it into a series of videos. And often the unconscious competence of leaders only usually comes out when someone asks them questions. So don't just assume as a founder that you can sit there and tell everyone what your culture is. Usually it requires somebody to ask you questions about, well, what do you think about this, or how would you deal with that? But this idea of going, you have to identify what the most important things are, codify them in a way that people can remember. So that usually means visual or an axiom or something that is sticky. And then you can only multiply when you've done the first two bits. Most leaders assume that people will pick it up if they hang around long enough. And that's usually where it goes wrong. So codify it, multiply it, capture it, talk it often, but do record best practice. Because I love the fact I can send new people who come to GiANT and go and watch this pathway on our platform. Welcome to GiANT. Jeremy and I, other key leaders, talk about why GiANT, what our values are, how we live them, how we do it. And then we have the live face-to-face, but they already have heard effectively the things we wanted them to hear. So leverage technology, but recognize if you don't codify it, you can't multiply it.
Awesome. This is actually probably a question that's relevant to both Gordon and you, Steve. So can you give us examples of how leaders solve problems through agile collaborative teams? Who wants to go first on that?
Steve, take that one.
Yes.
So this is where we use something called the 5 voices. If any of you are Myers-Briggs Jedis, I did that about 18 years ago, and there's very little about it I don't know, but we said with GiANT that basically every tool we use, an educated 13-year-old has to be able to understand it, use it, teach their friends, or it's too complicated. My educated 15-year-old, Izzy, came to me one day and said, Daddy, I love the fact I'm an NFP, but I can understand it, I can use it, I can't teach it to my friends. Doesn't that violate the principles that you said GiANT was built on? You get that wonderful moment, you're like, let me come back to you on that one, thank you so much. So 5 voices was written in the source code, but it actually captures, it can be multiplied without the need for an expert. So why do I say that? Well, if there are different personalities in every team, the only way I know that you can create, agile is usually through process. Collaborative The only way you do it is if you create an environment where every voice is truly heard, valued, and appreciated, and everyone in the team understands the superpower that that person brings. So we talk about everyone being a champion of something. So when it comes to winning, strategic alignment of people, systems, and resources, being highly competitive and strategy, I'm your man. But actually, I miss people, values, relational harmony. And actually, what we're really trying to do is to say collaboration is not, grudging, oh my goodness, come on, tell me. True collaboration is where I would never make decisions now that didn't actually have every person bringing the best they can. We even have something called rules of engagement, which you'll learn on the program, because I find if I go first as a loud voice pioneer, very forceful, strong, I go, this is what I think we should do. Who disagrees with me? And of course, nobody is brave enough to disagree with me because I carry a shoulder launch grenade as my weapon system into team meetings. I didn't know that. It just turned out to be true. So actually, the nurturers go first, the creatives go second, the guardians go third, the connectors go fourth, and the pioneers go last. Because it's the only way I worked out how everyone in the team gets to bring their best. And where you have, most entrepreneurs are highly charismatic individuals who can usually sell sand to the Arabs. And the problem is you tend to assume that you are right, in my case. And I used to think silence was agreement. Turns out silence wasn't agreement. It was just silence that they'd given up trying to think that I would listen to their opinion. I just wanted really them to affirm how brilliant my strategic idea was, and let's move to action as soon as we can. So it's probably why I'm so passionate about it. Watching teams deliver. The average score, by the way, of the average team of every size and every culture around the world has been 58%. So the average team in the average organization, in the average sector, anywhere in the world is functioning at about 58% of its true potential. No wonder things don't go quite the way they could. So Gordon, add whatever you want to that, but I'm about to start.
I think what I would just extend that to, so some people out there that might not have, a team with all these components in it, it's still extremely applicable as you think about forming your team. Because I think the default for a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of us, we think, great, I know what I'm doing. If I could just get 5 more people like me, it would be perfect. But of course, as you were just saying, Steve, that's not the best team. The best team is making sure that people with other talents and that how do you integrate them? And because we do act differently, having that appreciation for, just because someone is, is quiet and thoughtful versus maybe more outspoken, their contributions are equally valid. So a lot of things you're talking about, even extending that, I think when entrepreneurs go into the hiring process is a really important step.
It's fantastic. Obviously, everything you share, I've got a visual for. So this is that example. What voices need to be in your advisory group? So if you're an entrepreneur, you probably can't afford lots of employees, but you can create a group of people that you use as a sounding board. So I have in my weakest voices are nurturer and guardian. So I always make sure that regardless of what the issue is, I will always run it by people and say, this is what I'm thinking. What wisdom can you bring? So effectively, you can actually have an advisory group that are not on your team. So we're not dealing about, you've got to have 5 people. They're all got to be different personalities. We're dealing with how do you gather a group that actually give you the ability to really check before you make big decisions. I mean, I'm married to Helen. Without her, there would be no GiANT. She's been the long-suffering partner for 28 years now, and she is a nurturer guardian. So actually, I used to think that Helen was just, boring and very conservative. Now, I will often send her an email before it goes and go, what do you think about this? And she always says the same thing. She's like, you haven't sent this, have you? And I'm going like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, it would be a disaster if you did, because this is what I would hear. And I go, well, that's ridiculous. That's not at all what I meant. And she said, well, would you like me to edit it for you? And I go, yes, I'd love you to. And she sends it back. And I go, well, where's my email gone? She said, well, this will deliver what you were trying to say. And I'm like, I've learned over the years that actually Helen is the board I can't afford. And the number of times she's prevented me causing untold damage and panic without needing to. So again, the only reason I'm passionate about this is because I've seen the benefit in every circle of influence in my life, not least in my marriage. So
Awesome. Okay, so I think we have time for one final question, and that's from Alex. He's asked, how far should a leader go in liberating his team to get on with achieving the company's vision?
gosh, good question. I mean, I would say that my default is a leader should do everything they possibly can to be a liberating leader to their team, because ultimately you've got far more chance of achieving your vision if you're deploying all the resources that you have available. If the question is, if somebody doesn't want to be liberated, or if somebody doesn't like that culture, how long do you give them? This will probably be the answer of somebody who's higher on challenge than higher on support, because in the end, I'm always amazed that some people will keep people in the organization or team who actually are not really aligned on culture because they deliver performance. So for me, I'm always giving people a chance to call up, but I will say we hire for competence, but we usually fire for character. I would say that in the end, I will be as liberating as I can, but there will come a point where I will have to clarify expectations. That's a key role of leaders, to go, this is what I need from you. I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but let's be clear, if we can't do this, and for whatever reason it doesn't fit, liberation for the whole team may at times mean moving somebody on. So that's kind of a real challenge. I will always go the extra mile. My inherent belief is that most people want to do well. Most people start jobs, join things because they believe in it. It's usually the leaders of why they leave. Every statistic says people leave leaders more than jobs, because in the end, most leaders don't know how to create the environment where people get to bring their best. So liberate until you can do it no more, but don't just, sometimes it's a release to everyone when you make a tough decision, because in the end, even just keeping one person because you can't go through the pain of what the helping them leave would mean, you are actually impacting every other member of your team. So liberating the individual has to be balanced with liberating the whole, and that's the hardest decision I often find at the sharp end of that type of decision making. Gordon, what do you think?
Steve, thank you so much. I just really appreciate the time that you've given us. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset that we're calling time, but we've come to the end of our hour. So really appreciate your insights. I think just would mention again, there are, if you have followed some of the frameworks and you're looking for them, you can go to the GiANT Worldwide website for some of them, and also in some of the books that I mentioned, the 5 Voices, the 5 Gears, the 100X Leader. Really excited to be welcoming you and the team at the beginning of our first cohort in the middle of September. So people out there that are interested in joining that first cohort, applications will be opening next week, and we're really excited to start reading applications and speaking to people about what the program's all about. So thank you again, Steve. And I'm sure everybody, or certainly the people that come on the program, will be really excited to be with you, if not face-to-face, at least speaking one-on-one. I'm going to close it out now. I'll turn it over to SL in a minute, but let me just highlight that our discussion today was focused on leadership, which is one of the key areas that we start off the program with. Next week, we'll be having another webinar, also on one of our early modules, early points that we like to talk about. Of course, we are an impact accelerator. Impact is really important, and our faculty member, Josh Eyre, who is an expert on the impact topic, is going to be speaking with us about how your startup can create measurable impact. And we really focus on the word measurable. In our opinion, although all impact is great, it really matters that you can describe it, you can measure it, and you can tell people exactly what you're doing and the resources you're applying to it. So please join us next week, same time, 5 o'clock, as we talk about the topic of impact.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gordon. And just the last little thing from me, we will be recording the session this evening. So I'll send that out to you guys in an email at the start of next week. Our applications will also be open next week. We're really excited about that. So please, can you spread the word? The program that we're building is awesome. Obviously, we're going to say that, but it's true. So we're excited to welcome those applications from those of you that are interested. If you have any additional questions, then drop them through to hello@impactcentral.co.uk and we'll answer the questions that we can. If you haven't yet subscribe through the website and you will get emails for the next session at the start of next week. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.